Once I met a girl lost in a book, dreaming the past. Follow, she said, and jumped in a page. She smiled as she asked. Walked to Glenfinnan, waited with Charlie. We drank an old leaf, we were toasted by Robbie. We stood as they signed in our broth at the Abbey. She took me to places that I never thought you could see.
Hi, and welcome to Random Scottish History's Christmas and New Year episode for Independence Live. It's been an interesting end to this year. Zara Cat won't be joining us again. She has made her way over the Rainbow Bridge. It's taking a minute to adjust to life without her here. Everything is changed quite a lot going into the new year, which will be upon us in a couple of days. If there is an event that we celebrate in the month, I like to go into it and find as much information from Scottish history as possible. We go to the press and publications, etc. for the information. There's so much for Christmas and New Year's. So I'm actually going to restrict us to just the one publication for this festive season. We're going to take our information from Robert Chambers' Book of Days, which is an 1886 publication, and we're going to go into Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, Boxing Day, and New Year's, which we're about to see here. So I hope everyone had a good Christmas this year and had a nice time hooking up with friends and family, reconnecting after what's been a kind of crazy 3 years or so. Okay, so we'll get into Christmas Eve. The eves or vigils of the different ecclesiastical festivals throughout the year are, according to the strict letter of canonical rule, times of fasting and penance, but in several instances, custom has appropriated them to very different purposes, and made them seasons of mirth and jollity. Such is the case with All Saints' Eve, and perhaps even more so with Christmas Eve or the evening before Christmas Day. Under the latter head, or the 25th of December, will be found a special history of the great Christian festival, though the observances of both days are so intertwined together that it becomes impossible to state, with precision, the ceremonies which are peculiar to each. We shall, however, do the best we can in the circumstances, and endeavour, under the 24th of December, to restrict ourselves to an account of the popular celebrations and customs which characterise more especially the Eve of the Nativity. With Christmas Eve, the Christmas holidays may practically be said to commence, though, according to ecclesiastical computation, the festival really begins on the 16th of December, or the day which is distinguished in the calendar as O Sapientia, from the name of an anthem sung during Advent. It is proper, however, to state that there seems to be a discrepancy of opinion on this point, and that, in the judgment of some, the true Christmas festival does not commence till the evening before Christmas Day. The season is held to terminate on the 1st of February, or the evening before the purification of the Virgin, Candlemas Day, by which date, according to the ecclesiastical canons, all the Christmas decorations must be removed from the churches. In common parlance, certainly, the Christmas holidays comprehend a period of nearly a fortnight, commencing on Christmas Eve and ending on Twelfth Day. The whole of this season is still a jovial one, abounding in entertainments and merrymakings of all sorts, but is very much changed from what it used to be with our ancestors in feudal times, when it was an almost intermitted round of feasting and jollity. For a picture of Christmas Eve in the olden time, we can desire none more graphic than that furnished by Sir Walter Scott in Marmion. On Christmas Eve the bells were rung, on Christmas Eve the Mass was sung. That only night in all the year saw the stoled priest the chalice rear. The damsel donned her kirtle sheen, the hall was dressed with holly green. Forth to the wood did merry men go, to gather in the mistletoe. Then opened wide the baron's hall, to vassal, tenant, serf, and all. Power laid his rod of rule aside, and ceremony doffed his pride. The heir with roses in his shoes that night might village partner choose. The lord, underogating, share the vulgar game of post and pair, all hailed with uncontrolled delight in general voice the happy night, that to the cottage as the crown brought tidings of salvation down. The fire with well-dried logs supplied went roaring up the chimney wide, the huge hall table's oaken face, scrubbed till it shone the day to grace, bore then upon its massive board no mark to part the squire and lord. Then was brought in the lusty brawn by old blue-coated serving man. Then the grim boar's head frowned on high, created with bays and rosemary. Well can the green-garbed ranger tell how, when, and where the monster fell. What dogs before his death he tore, and all the baiting of the boar, the wassail round in good brown bowls, garnished with ribbons blithely trowels. There the huge sirloin reeked hard by, plum porridge stood, and Christmas pie. Nor failed old Scotland to produce at such high tide her savoury goose. Then came the merry maskers in, and carols roared with blithesome din. If unmelodious was the song, it was a hearty note and strong. Who lists may in their mumming see traces of ancient mystery. White shirt supplied the masquerade, and smutted cheeks the visors made. But oh, what maskers richly dight can boast of bosoms half so light? England was merry England when old Christmas brought his sports again. 'Twas Christmas broached the mightiest ale, 'twas Christmas told the merriest tale. A Christmas gambol oft could cheer the poor man's heart through half the year. We have frequently in the course of this work had occasion to remark on the numerous traces still visible in popular customs of the old pagan rites and ceremonies. These it is needless here to repeat, were extensively retained after the conversion of Britain to Christianity, partly because the Christian teachers found it impossible to wean their converts from their cherished superstitions and observances, and partly because they themselves, as a matter of expediency, engrafted the rites of the Christian religion on the old heathen ceremonies, believing that thereby the cause of the cross would be rendered more acceptable to the generality of the populace, and thus be more effectually promoted. By such an amalgamation, no festival of the Christian year was more thoroughly characterized than Christmas, the festivities of which, originally derived from the Roman Saturnalia, had afterwards been intermingled with the ceremonies observed by the British Druids at the period of the winter solstice, and at a subsequent period became incorporated with the grim mythology of the ancient Saxons. Two popular observances belonging to Christmas are more especially derived from the worship of our pagan ancestors, the hanging up of the mistletoe and the burning of the Yule log. As regards the former of these practices, it is well known that in the religion of the Druids the mistletoe was regarded with the utmost veneration, though the reverence which they paid to it seems to have been restricted to the plant when found growing on the oak, the favourite tree of their divinity, Tutanes, who appears to have been the same as the Phoenician god Baal, or the sun, worshipped under so many different names by the various pagan nations of antiquity. At the period of the winter solstice, a great festival was celebrated in his honour, as will be found more largely commented on under our notice of Christmas Day. When the sacred anniversary arrived, the ancient Britons, accompanied by their priests, the Druids, sallied forth with great pomp and rejoicings to gather the mystic parasite, which, in addition to the religious reverence with which it was regarded, was believed to possess wondrous curative powers. When the oak was reached on which the mistletoe grew, 2 white bulls were bound to the tree, and the chief druid, clothed in white, the emblem of purity, ascended, and with a golden knife cut the sacred plant, which was caught by another priest in the folds of his robe. The bulls, and often also human victims, were then sacrificed, and various festivities followed. The mistletoe thus gathered was divided into small portions and distributed among the people, who hung up the sprays over the entrances to their dwellings, as a propitiation and shelter to the sylvan deities during the season of frost and cold. The following legend regarding the mistletoe from the Scandinavian mythology may here be introduced. Balder, the god of poetry and eloquence, and second son of Odin and Frigga, communicated one day to his mother a dream which he had had, intimating that he should die. She, Frigga, to protect her son from such a contingency, invoked all the powers of nature, fire, air, earth, and water, as well as animals and plants, and obtained an oath from them that they should do Balder no hurt. The latter then went and took his place amidst the combats of the gods, and fought without fear in the midst of showers and arrows. Loki, his enemy, resolved to discover the secret of Balder's invulnerability, and, accordingly, disguising himself as an old woman, he addressed himself to Frigga with complimentary remarks on the valour and good fortune of her son. The goddess replied that no substance could injure him, as all the productions of nature had bound themselves by an oath to refrain from doing him any harm. She added, however, with that awkward simplicity which appears so often to characterize mythical personages, that there was one plant which, from its insignificance, she did not think of conjuring, as it was impossible that it could inflict any hurt on her son. Loki inquired the name of the plant in question, and was informed that it was a feeble little shoot growing on the bark of the oak, with scarcely any soil. Then the treacherous Loki procured the mistletoe, and having entered the assembly of the gods, said to the blind Heda, "Why do you not contend with the arrows of Balder?" Heda replied, "I am blind and have no arms." Loki then presented him with an arrow formed from the mistletoe, and said, "Balder is before thee." Heda shot, and Balder fell, pierced and slain. The mistletoe, which has thus so many mystic associations connected with it, is believed to be propagated in its natural state by the mistle thrush, which feeds upon its berries. It was long thought impossible to propagate it artificially, but this object has been attained by bruising the berries, and by means of their viscidity, causing them to adhere to the bark of fruit trees, where they readily germinate and take root. The growth of the mistletoe and the oak is now of extremely rare occurrence, but the plant flourishes in great frequency and luxuriance on the apple trees. The special custom connected with the mistletoe on Christmas Eve, and an indubitable relic of the days of Druidism, handed down through a long course of centuries, must be familiar to all our readers. A branch of the mystic plant is suspended from the wall or ceiling, and any one of the fair sex who, either from inadvertence or, as possibly may be insinuated, on purpose, passes beneath the sacred spray, incurs the penalty of being then and there kissed by any lord of the creation who chooses to avail himself of the privilege. The burning of the Yule log is an ancient Christmas ceremony, transmitted to us from our Scandinavian ancestors, who, at their feast of Yule, at the winter solstice, used to kindle huge bonfires in honour of their god Thor. The custom, though sadly shorn of the pomp and circumstance which formerly attended it, is still maintained in various parts of the country. The bringing in and placing of the ponderous block in the hearth of the wide chimney in the baronial hall was the most joyous of the ceremonies observed on Christmas Eve in feudal times. The venerable log, destined to crackle a welcome to all comers, was drawn in triumph from its resting place at the feet of its living brethren of the woods. Each wayfarer raised his hat as it passed, for he well knew that it was full of good promises, and that its flame would burn out old wrongs and heart-burnings, and cause the liquor to bubble in the wassail bowl that was quaffed to the drowning of ancient feuds and animosities. So the Yule log was worthily honoured, and the ancient bards welcomed its entrance with their minstrelsy. The following ditty, appropriate to such an occasion, appears in the Sloane manuscripts. It is supposed to be of the time of James II. Welcome Yule. Welcome be thou, heavenly King, welcome born on this morning, welcome for whom we shall sing, welcome Yule. Welcome be ye, Stephen and John, welcome innocents every one, welcome Thomas, martyr one, welcome Yule. Welcome be ye, good New Year, welcome 12th day, both in fear, welcome saints loved and dear, welcome Yule. Welcome be ye, Candlemas, welcome be ye, Queen of Bliss, welcome both to more and less, welcome Yule. Welcome be ye that are here, welcome all and make good cheer, welcome all another year, welcome Yule. Among the Roman Catholics, a Mass is always celebrated at midnight on Christmas Eve, another at daybreak on Christmas Day, and a third at a subsequent hour in the morning. A beautiful phase in popular superstition is that which represents a thorough prostration of the powers of darkness as taking place at this season, and that no evil influence can then be exerted by them on mankind. The cock is then supposed to crow all night long, and by his vigilance to scare away all malignant spirits. The Christmas Tree. Christmas Eve in Germany and America. In Germany, Christmas Eve is for children the most joyous night in the year, as they then feast their eyes on the magnificence of the Christmas tree and rejoice in the presents which have been provided for them on its branches by their parents and friends. The tree is arranged by the senior members of the family in the principal room of the house, and with the arrival of evening the children are assembled in an adjoining apartment. At a given signal, the door of the great room is thrown open, and in rush the juveniles, eager and happy. There, on a long table in the centre of the room, stands a Christmas tree, every branch glittering with little lighted tapers, while all sorts of gifts and ornaments are suspended from the branches, and possibly also numerous other presents are deposited separately on the table, all properly labelled with the names of the respective recipients. The Christmas tree seems to be a very ancient custom in Germany, and is probably a remnant of the splendid and fanciful pageants of the Middle Ages. Within the last 40 years, and apparently since the marriage of Queen Victoria with Prince Albert, previous to which time it was almost unknown in this country, the custom has been introduced into Britain with the greatest success, and must be familiar to most of our readers, though thoroughly an innovation on our old Christmas customs, and partaking indeed somewhat of a prosaic character, rather at variance with the beautiful poetry of many of our Christmas usages. He would be a cynic indeed who could derive no pleasure from contemplating the group of young and happy faces who cluster round the Christmas tree. In the state of Pennsylvania, in North America, where many of the settlers are of German descent, Christmas Eve is observed with many of the ceremonies practised in the fatherland of the Old World. The Christmas tree branches forth in all its splendour, and before going to sleep the children hang up their stockings at the foot of the bed, to be filled by a personage bearing the name of Crish Kinkle, a corruption of Christ Kindling, or the infant Christ, who is supposed to descend the chimney with gifts for all good children. If, however, anyone has been naughty, he finds a birch rod instead of sweetmeats in the stocking. This implement of correction is believed to have been placed there by another personage called Pelsnickel, or Nicholas with the Fur, in allusion to the dress of skins which he is supposed to wear. In this notion, a connection is evidently to be traced with the well-known legendary attributes of St. Nicholas, previously described, though the benignant character of the saint is in this instance woefully belied. It is further to be remarked that though the general understanding is that Crishkinkle and Pelsnickel are distinct personages, the one the rewarder of good children, the other the punisher of the bad, they are also occasionally represented as the same individual under different characters, the prototype of which was doubtless the charitable St. Nicholas. Christmas Games. Some interesting particulars relative to the indoor diversions of our ancestors at Christmas occur in the following passage quoted by Brand from a tract entitled Round About Our Coal Fire, or Christmas Entertainments, which was published in the early part of the last or 18th century. The time of year being cold and frosty, the diversions are within doors, either in exercise or by the fireside. Dancing is one of the chief exercises, or else there is a match at blind man's buff, or puss in the corner. The next game is questions and commands, when the commander may oblige his subjects to answer any lawful question, and make the same obey him instantly, under the penalty of being smutted, or having the face blackened, or paying such forfeit as may be laid on the aggressor. Most of the other diversions are cards and dice. From the above we gather that the sports on Christmas evenings 150 years ago were not greatly dissimilar to those in vogue at the present day. The names of almost all the pastimes then mentioned must be familiar to every reader, who has probably also participated in them himself at some period of his life. Let us only add charades, that favourite amusement of modern drawing-rooms, and of these only the name, not the sport itself, was unknown to our ancestors. together with a higher spirit of refinement and delicacy, and we shall discover little difference between the juvenile pastimes of a Christmas party in the reign of Queen Victoria and a similar assemblage in the reign of Queen Anne or the first Georges, the mummers. The mummers, or as they are styled in Scotland, the guisers or gizzards, occupied a prominent place in the Christmas revels of the olden time, and their performances, though falling, like the other old customs of the season, into desuetude, are still kept up in several parts of the country. The passion for masquerade, like that for dramatic representation, seems an inherent one in human nature, and though social progress and fashion may modify and vary the peculiar mode of development, the tendency itself remains unaltered, and only adopts from age to age a new, and it may be, more intellectual phase. Thus the rude and irreverent mysteries and miracle plays which delighted our ancestors have been succeeded in the gradual course of improvement by the elaborate stage mechanism and display of our own times, and the coarse drolleries which characterize the old Christmas festivities have made way for the games and charades, and other refined amusements of modern drawing-rooms. But in all these changes we only find an expression under altered and diversified forms of certain essential feelings and tendencies in the constitution of humanity. Looking back to the Roman Saturnalia, from which so many of our Christmas usages are derived, we find that the practice of masquerading was greatly in vogue at that season among the people of Rome. Men and women assumed respectively the attire of the opposite sex, and masks of all kinds were worn in abundance. The early Christians, we are informed, used, on the feast of the Circumcision, or New Year's Day, to run about in masks in ridicule of the pagan superstitions, but there can be no doubt that they also frequently shared in the frolics of their heathen neighbours, and the fathers of the Church had considerable difficulty in prevailing on their members to refrain from such unedifying pastimes. Afterwards the clergy endeavoured to metamorphose the heathen revels into amusements, which, if not really more spiritual in character than those which they supplanted, had at least the merit of bearing references to the observances and recognising the authority of the Church and its ministers. The mysteries or miracle plays, in which even the clergy occasionally took part as performers, were the results, amid numerous others, of this policy. These singular dramas continued for many centuries to form a favourite amusement of the populace, both at Christmas and other seasons of the year. The Christmas mumming was in many respects a kindred diversion, though it appears to have partaken less of the religious element, and resembled more nearly those medieval pageants in which certain subjects and characters, taken from pagan mythology or popular legends, were represented. Frequently also it assumed very much the nature of a masquerade, when the sole object of the actors is to disguise themselves and excite alternately laughter and admiration by the splendid or ridiculous costumes in which they are arrayed. As regards the guisers in Scotland, where the festivities of the winter season cluster chiefly around the New Year, we shall have occasion to make special reference to them under the 31st of December, or Hogmanay. The Lord of Misrule. In Scotland, previous to the Reformation, the monasteries used to elect a functionary for the superintendence of the Christmas revels, under the designation of the Abbot of Unreason. The readers of the Waverley novels will recollect the graphic delineation of one of these mock ecclesiastics in The Abbot. An ordinance for suppressing this annual burlesque, with other festivities of a like kind, was passed by the Scottish legislature in 1555. In France, we find the cogenour of the Lord of Misrule and the Abbot of Unreason in the Abbos Stultorum, the Abbot or Pope of Fools. The Waits. It is a curious circumstance that no one appears clearly to know whether the term waits denoted originally musical instruments, a particular kind of music, or the persons who played under certain special circumstances. A writer in Notes and Queries draws attention to the analogy between the words waits and waith, the latter of which in Scotland means wandering or roaming about from place to place. Such wanderers were the minstrels of Scotland, who, 3 centuries ago, were under the patronage of the Civic Corporation of Glasgow, and at the city's expense were clothed in blue coats or outer garments. A remnant of this custom, still popularly called waits, yet exists in the magistrates annually granting a kind of certificate or diploma to a few musicians, generally blind men, of respectable character, who perambulate the streets of the city during the night and morning, for about 3 weeks or a month previous to New Year's Day. in most cases performing on violins the slow, soothing airs peculiar to a portion of the old Scottish melodies, and in the solemn silence of repose the effect is very fine. At the commencement of the new year, these men call at the houses of the inhabitants, and presenting their credentials, receive a small subscription. It is evident that considerable confusion prevails on the subject of the waits, but if we abide by the modern meaning of the term, we shall find that it refers exclusively to a company of musicians whose performances bear a special relation to the season of Christmas. In Scotland, perhaps, they are more associated with the New Year. We're on to Christmas Day. The festival of Christmas is regarded as the greatest celebration throughout the ecclesiastical year, and so important and joyous a solemnity it is deemed that a special exception is made in its favour, whereby, in the event of the anniversary falling on a Friday, that day of the week, under all other circumstances a fast, is transformed to a festival. That the birth of Jesus Christ, the deliverer of the human race and the mysterious link connecting the transcendent and incomprehensible attributes of deity with human sympathies and affections, should be considered as the most glorious event that ever happened, and the most worthy of being reverently and joyously commemorated, is a proposition which must commend itself to the heart and reason of every one of his followers who aspires to walk in his footsteps, and share in the ineffable benefits which his death has secured to mankind. And so, though at one period denounced by the Puritans as superstitious, and to the present day disregarded by Calvinistic Protestants as unwarranted by Scripture, there are few who will seriously dispute the propriety of observing the anniversary of Christ's birth by a religious service. A question, however, which has been long and eagerly agitated, is here brought forward. Is the 25th of December really the day on which our Saviour first shewed himself in human form in the manger at Bethlehem? The evidence which we possess regarding the date is not only traditional, but likewise conflicting and confused. In the earliest periods at which we have any record of the observance of Christmas, we find that some communities of Christians celebrated the festival on the 1st or 6th of January, others on the 29th of March, the time of the Jewish Passover, while others, it is said, observed it on the 29th of September, or Feast of Tabernacles. There can be no doubt, however, that long before the reign of Constantine in the 4th century, the season of the New Year had been adopted as the period for celebrating the Nativity, though a difference in this respect existed in the practice of the Eastern and Western churches, the former observing the 6th of January and the latter the 25th of December. The custom of the Western Church at last prevailed, and both of the ecclesiastical bodies agreed to hold the anniversary on the same day. The fixing of the date appears to have been the act of Julius I, who presided as Pope or Bishop of Rome from 337 to 352 CE. The circumstance is doubted by Mosheim, but is confirmed by St. Chrysostom, who died in the beginning of the 5th century. The celebrated father of the Church informs us in one of his epistles that Julius, on the solicitation of St. Cyril of Jerusalem, caused strict inquiries to be made on the subject, and thereafter, following what seemed to be the best authenticated tradition, settled authoritatively the 25th of December as the anniversary of Christ's birth, the Festorum Omnium Metropolis, as it is styled by Chrysostom. It is true, indeed, that some have representing this fixing of the day to have been accomplished by St. Telesphorus, who was Bishop of Rome on 128 to 139 CE, but the authority for the assertion is very doubtful. Towards the close of the 2nd century we find a notice of the observance of Christmas in the reign of the Emperor Commodus, and about 100 years afterwards in the time of Diocletian. An atrocious act of cruelty is recorded of the last-named emperor, who caused a church in Nicomedia, where the Christians were celebrating the Nativity, to be set on fire, and by barring every means of egress from the building, made all the worshippers perish in the flames. Since the end of the 4th century at least, the 25th of December has been uniformly observed as the anniversary of the Nativity by all the nations of Christendom. though Christian nations have thus, from an early period in the history of the Church, celebrated Christmas about the period of the winter solstice or the shortest day, it is well known that many, and indeed the greater number of the popular festive observances by which it is characterized, are referable to a much more ancient origin. Amid all the pagan nations of antiquity, there seems to have been a universal tendency to worship the sun as the giver of life and light, and the visible manifestation of the deity. Various as were the names bestowed by different peoples on this object of their worship, he was still the same divinity. Thus at Rome he appears to have been worshipped under one of the characters attributed to Saturn, the father of the gods. Among the Scandinavian nations he was known under the epithet of Odin or Woden, the father of Thor, who seems afterwards to have shared with his parent the adoration bestowed on the latter as a divinity of which the sun was the visible manifestation, whilst with the ancient Persians the appellation for the god of light was Mithras, apparently the same as the Irish Mithrir, and with the Phoenicians and Carthaginians it was Baal or Bel, an epithet familiar to all students of the Bible. Concurring thus as regards the object of worship, there was no less remarkable uniformity in the period of the year at which these different nations celebrated a grand festival in his honour. The time chosen appears to have been universally the season of the new year, or rather the winter solstice, from which the new year was frequently reckoned. This unanimity in the celebration of the festival in question is to be ascribed to the general feeling of joy which all of us experience when the gradual shortening of the day reaches its utmost limit on the 21st of December, and the sun, recommencing his upward course, announces that midwinter is past and spring and summer are approaching. On similar grounds, and with similar demonstrations, the ancient pagan nations observed a festival at midsummer, or the summer solstice, when the sun arrives at the culminating point of his ascent on the 21st of June, or longest day. In the early ages of Christianity, its ministers frequently experienced the utmost difficulty in inducing the converts to refrain from indulging in the popular amusements which were so largely participated in by their pagan countrymen. Among others, the revelry and licence which characterized the Saturnalia called for special animadversion, but at last, convinced partly of the inefficacy of such denunciations, and partly influenced by the idea that the spread of Christianity might thereby be advanced, the Church endeavoured to amalgamate, as it were, the old and new religions, and sought, by transferring the heathen ceremonies to the solemnities of the Christian festivals, to make them subservient to the cause of religion and piety. A compromise was thus effected between clergy and laity, though it must be admitted that it proved anything but a harmonious one, as we find a constant, though ineffectual prescription by the ecclesiastical authorities of the favourite amusements of the people, including among others the sports and revelries at Christmas. Engrafted thus on the Roman Saturnalia, the Christmas festivities received in Britain further changes and modifications, by having superadded to them, first the druidical rites and superstitions, and then, after the arrival of the Saxons, the various ceremonies practised by the ancient Germans and Scandinavians. The result has been the strange medley of Christian and pagan rites which contribute to make up the festivities of the modern Christmas. Of these, the burning of the Yule log and the superstitions connected with the mistletoe have already been described under Christmas Eve, and further accounts are given under separate heads, both under the 24th and 25th of December. The name given by the ancient Goths and Saxons to the festival of the winter solstice was Yule or Yule, the latter term forming to the present day the designation in the Scottish dialect of Christmas, and preserved also in the phrase of the Yule log. Perhaps the etymology of no term has excited greater discussion among antiquaries. Some maintain it to be derived from the Greek, the name of a hymn in order of Ceres. Others say it comes from the Latin jubilum, signifying a time of rejoicing, or from its being a festival in honour of Julius Caesar, while some also explain its meaning as synonymous with all or ule, which in the ancient Gothic language denotes a feast, and also the favourite liquor used on such occasion, whence our word ale, but a much more probable derivation of the term in question is from the Gothic gule or hule, the origin of the modern word wheel, and bearing the same signification. The Yule Festival received its name from its being the turning point of the year, or the period at which the fiery orb of day made a revolution in his annual circuit, and entered on his northern journey. A confirmation of this view is afforded by the circumstance that in the old clog almanacs a wheel is the device employed for marking the season of Yuletide, in reference to the superstition anciently prevalent in Scotland against spinning on Christmas or Yule Day, and the determination of the Calvinistic clergy to put down all such notions. The following amusing passage is quoted by Dr. Jameson from John Hamilton's Facile Treatise. The ministers of Scotland, in contempt of the other hally days, observe it to be England, cause their wifes and servants spin in open sight of the people upon Yule Day, and their affectionate auditors constrains their tenants to yoke their pleuchs on Yule Day, in contempt of Christ's nativity, whilk our Lord has not left unpunished, for their oxen ran wod, or mad, and brak their neckes, and leamet, lamed, some ploughmen, as is notoriously known in sundry parts of Scotland. In consequence of the Presbyterian form of church government, as constituted by John Knox and his coadjutors on the model of the ecclesiastical polity of Calvin, having taken such firm root in Scotland, the festival of Christmas, with other commemorative celebrations retained from the Romish calendar by the Anglicans and Lutherans, is comparatively unknown in that country, at least in the Lowlands. The tendency to mirth and jollity at the close of the year, which seems almost inherent in human nature, has in North Britain been, for the most part, transferred from Christmas and Christmas Eve to New Year's Day, and the preceding evening, known by the appellation of Hogmanay. In many parts of the Highlands of Scotland, however, and also in the county of Forfar, and one or two other districts, the day for the great annual merrymaking is Christmas. Christmas charities. In olden times it was customary to extend the charities of Christmas and the New Year to the lower animals. Burns refers to this practice in the old farmer's address to his mare, when presenting her on New Year's morning with an extra feed of corn. "A good New Year I wish thee, Maggie, hey, there's a rip to thy old baggie." The great-grandfather of the writer, a small proprietor in the Carse of Falkland in Scotland and an Episcopalian, used regularly himself every Christmas morning to carry a special supply of fodder to each individual animal in his stable and cow-house. The old gentleman was wont to say that this was a morning, of all others in the year, when man and beast ought alike to have occasion to rejoice. Christmas decorations. It is evident that the use of flowers and green boughs as a means of decoration is almost instinctive in human nature, and we accordingly find scarcely any nation, civilized or savage, with which it has not become more or less familiar. The Jews employed it in their Feast of Tabernacles in the month of September. The ancient Druids and other Celtic nations hung up the mistletoe and green branches of different kinds over their doors to propitiate the woodland sprites, and a similar usage prevailed, as we have seen, in Rome. In short, the feeling thus so universally exhibited is one of natural religion, and therefore not to be traced exclusively to any particular creed or form of worship. The favourite plants for church decoration at Christmas are holly, bay, rosemary, and laurel. Ivy is rather objectionable from its associations, having anciently been sacred to Bacchus, and employed largely in the orgies celebrated in honour of the god of wine. Cypress, we are informed, has been sometimes used, but its funereal relations render it rather out of place at a festive season like Christmas. One plant in special is excluded, the mystic mistletoe, which, from its antecedents, would be regarded as about as inappropriate to the interior of a church as the celebration of the old druidical rites within the sacred building. And finally, for the Christmas portion, we have December the 26th, St. Stephen's or Boxing Day. Christmas boxes. We must not be too hard in the system of Christmas boxes, or hansels as they are termed in Scotland, where, however, they are scarcely ever claimed till after the commencement of the new year. That many abuses did and still do cling to them we readily admit, but there is also intermingled with them a spirit of kindliness and benevolence, which would be very undesirable to extirpate. It seems almost instinctive for the generous side of human nature to bestow some reward for civility and attention, and an additional incentive to such liberality is not unfrequently furnished by the belief that its recipient is but inadequately remunerated otherwise for the duties which he performs. Thousands, too, of the commonalty look eagerly forward to the forthcoming guerdon on Boxing Day, as a means of procuring some little unwanted treat or relaxation, either in the way of sightseeing or some other mode of enjoyment. Who would desire to abridge the happiness of so many? We'll get on to New Year's, shall we? Once again, we're taking the information from Robert Chambers' Book of Days. This is for the 31st of December, tomorrow night, Hogmanay. In some parts of the country, indeed, and more especially in the northern counties, various social merrymakings take place, but for the most part the great annual holiday time is already past. Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, and St. Stephen's or Boxing Day have absorbed almost entirely the tendencies and opportunities of the community at large in the direction of joviality and relaxation. Business and the ordinary routine of daily life have again been resumed, or, to apply to British habits, the words of an old Scottish rhyme still current, but evidently belonging to the old times, anterior to the Reformation, when Christmas was the great popular festival. Yule's come and Yule's gane, and we hae feasted weel, say Jock maun to his flail again, and Jenny to her wheel. Whilst thus the inhabitants of South Britain are settling down again quietly to work after the festivities of the Christmas season, their fellow subjects in the northern division of the island are only commencing their annual Saturnalia, which, till recently, bore in the licence and boisterous merriment which used to prevail, a most unmistakable resemblance to its ancient pagan namesake. The epithet of the draft, or mad days, applied to the season of the New Year in Scotland, indicates very expressively the uproarious joviality which characterised the period in question. This exuberance of joyousness, which, it must be admitted, sometimes led to great excesses, has now much declined, but New Year's Eve and New Year's Day constitute still the great national holiday in Scotland. Under the 1st of January we have already detailed the various revelries by which the New Year used to be ushered in Scotland. It now becomes our province to notice those ceremonies and customs which are appropriate to the last day of the year, or, as it is styled in Scotland, Hogmanay. The last term has puzzled antiquaries even more than the word Yule already adverted to, and what is of still greater consequence has never yet received a perfectly satisfactory explanation. Some suppose it to be derived from two Greek words, the holy moon or month. Another hypothesis combines the word with another sung along with it in chorus and asserts Hogmanay Trollalay to be a corruption of Omet Ne, Tra-ra-la. A man is born, three kings are there, an allusion to the birth of our Saviour and the visit to Bethlehem of the wise men, who were known in the medieval times as the Three Kings. But two additional conjectures seem much more plausible, and the reader may select for himself what he considers the most probable. One of these is that the term under notice is derived from Hogunot, Hogunat, or Hognight, the ancient Scandinavian name for the night preceding the feast of Yule, and so called in reference to the animals slaughtered on the occasion for sacrificial and phasal purposes, the word hog signifying to kill. The other derivation of Hogmanay is from Ogumene, to the mistletoe go, or Ogwe le Neuf, to the mistletoe this new year. An allusion to the ancient druidical ceremony of gathering that plant. In the patois of Touraine in France, the word used is aguilano. In Lower Normandy and in Guernsey, the poor persons and children used to solicit a contribution under the title of Oguinano or Oguinano, whilst in Spain the term aguinaldo is employed to denote the presents made at the season of Christmas. In country places in Scotland, and also in the more retired and primitive towns, it is still customary on the morning of the last day of the year, or Hogmanay, for the children of the poorer class of people to get themselves swaddled in a great sheet, doubled up in front so as to form a vast pocket, and then to go along the streets in little bands calling at the doors of the wealthier classes for an expected dole of oaten bread. Each child gets 1/4 section of oat cake, sometimes, in the case of particular favourites, improved by an addition of cheese, and this is called their Hogmanay. In expectation of the large demands thus made upon them, the housewives busy themselves for several days beforehand in preparing a suitable quantity of cakes. The children, on coming to the door, cry Hogmanay, which is in itself a sufficient announcement of their demands, but there are other explanations which either are or might be used for the same purpose. One of these is Hogmanay, Trollalay, give us of your white bread and none of your grey. Another favourite rhyme is, "Get up, good wife, and shake your feathers, and dinna think that we are beggars, for we are bairns come out to play. Get up and gi'e our Hogmanay." The following is of a moralising character, though a good deal of truism. "Get up, good wife, and binna swear, and deal your breed to them that's there, for the time will come when you'll be dead, and then you'll neither need ale nor bread." The most favourite of all, however, is more to the point than any of the foregoing. "My feet's cauld, my shoes thin, gi'e my cakes and let me in." It is no unpleasing scene during the forenoon to see the children going laden home, each with his large apron bellying out before him, stuffed full of cakes, and perhaps scarcely able to waddle under the load. Such a mass of oaten alms is no inconsiderable addition to the comfort of the poor man's household, and enables him to enjoy the New Year season as much as his richer neighbours. In the primitive parish of Deerness in Orkney, it was customary in the beginning of the present century for old and young of the common class of people to assemble in a great band upon the evening of the last day of the year, and commence a round of visits throughout the district. At every house they knocked at the door, and on being admitted commenced singing, to a tune of its own, a song appropriate to the occasion. The following is what may be termed a restored version of this chant, the imagination having been called on to make up in several of the lines what was deficient in memory. The Queen Mary alluded to is evidently the Virgin. "This night it is Good Newin's night. We're a' here, Queen Mary's men, and we're come here to crave our right, and that's before Our Lady. The very first thing which we do crave, we're a' here, Queen Mary's men, a bonny white candle we must luve, and that's before Our Lady. Good wife, gae to your butter ark, and weigh us here 10 mark. 10 mark, 10 pun, look at that grip wheel to the grun. Good wife, gae to your geelin vat, and fetch us here a skeel o' that. Gang to your omry, gin ye please, and bring frae there a yow milk cheese. And syne bring here a sharping stane, we'll sharp our whittles ilka ane. You'll cut the cheese and eke the round, but I take care ye cutna your thumb. Gae, fill the 3-pint cog o' ale, the muck maun be aboon the meal. We hope your ale is stark and stout, for men to drink the auld year out. Ye ken the weather's snaw and sleet, stir up the fire to warm our feet. Our shoons made o' mareskin, come open the door, and let us in." The inner door being opened, a tremendous rush was made ben the house. The inmates furnished a long table with all sorts of homely fare, and a hearty feast took place, followed by copious libations of ale, charged with all sorts of good wishes. The party would then proceed to the next house, where a similar scene would be enacted. How they contrived to take so many suppers in one evening, heaven knows. No slight could be more keenly felt by a Deerness farmer than to have house passed over unvisited by the New Year's singers. The doings of the geysers or gizzards, that is, maskers or mummers, form a conspicuous feature in the New Year proceedings throughout Scotland. The favourite night for this exhibition is Hogmanay, though the evenings of Christmas, New Year's Day, and Hansel Monday enjoy likewise a privilege in this respect. Such of the boys as can lay any claim to the possession of a voice have for weeks before been poring over the collection of excellent new songs, which lies like a bunch of rags in the window-sill, and being now able to screech up Barbara Allen, or the wee cot house in the wee kail yardie, they determine upon enacting the part of geysers. For this purpose they don old shirts belonging to their fathers and mount mitred-shaped casks of brown paper, possibly borrowed from the Abbot of Unreason. Attached to this is a sheet of the same paper, which, falling down in front, covers and conceals the whole face, except where holes are made to let through the point of the nose, and afford sight to the eyes and breath to the mouth. Each vocal geyser is, like a knight of old, attended by a sort of humble squire, who assumes the habiliments of a girl with an old woman's cap and a broomstick, and is styled Bessie. Bessie is equal in no respect, except that she shares fairly in the proceeds of the enterprise. She goes before her principal, opens all the doors at which he pleases to exert his singing powers, and busies herself during the time of the song in sweeping the floor with her broomstick, or in playing any other antics that she thinks may amuse the indwellers. The common reward of this entertainment is a halfpenny, but many churlish persons fall upon the unfortunate geysers and beat them out of the house. Let such persons, however, keep a good watch upon their cabbage gardens next Halloween. The more important doings of the geysers are of a theatrical character. There is one rude and grotesque drama which they are accustomed to perform on each of the 4 above-mentioned nights, and which, in various fragments or versions, exists in every part of lowland Scotland. The performers, who are never less than 3 but sometimes as many as 6, having dressed themselves, proceed in a band from house to house, generally contenting themselves with the kitchen for an arena, whither, in mansions presided over by the spirit of good humour, the whole family will resort to witness the spectacle. Sir Walter Scott, who delighted to keep up the old customs and could condescend to simple things without losing genuine dignity, invariably had a set of guisers to perform this play before his family at both Ashestiel and Abbotsford. The drama in question bears a close resemblance, with sundry modifications, and of which we have already given a specimen. Burning of the Clavey. A singular custom, almost unparalleled in any other part of Scotland, takes place on New Year's Eve, old style, at the village of Burghead on the southern shore of the Moray Firth, about 9 miles from the town of Elgin. It has been observed there from time immemorial, and both its origin and that of the peculiar appellation by which it is distinguished form still matter of conjecture and dispute for antiquaries. The following extract from the Banffshire Journal presents a very interesting and comprehensive view of all that can be stated regarding this remarkable ceremonial. Any Hogmanay afternoon, a small group of seamen and coopers dressed in blue overfrocks and followed by numbers of noisy youngsters may be seen rapidly wending their way to the southwestern extremity of the village, where it is customary to build the Clavey. One of the men bears on his shoulders a stout Archangel tar barrel, kindly presented for the occasion by one of the merchants, who has very considerately left a quantity of the resinous fluid in the bottom. Another carries a common herring cask, while the remainder are laden with other raw materials and the tools necessary for the construction of the Clavey. Arrived at the spot, 3 cheers being given for the success of the undertaking, operations are commenced forthwith. In the first place, the tar barrel is sawn into 2 unequal parts. The smaller forms the groundwork of the Clavey, the other is broken up for fuel. A common fir prop, some 4 feet in length, called the spoke, being then procured, a hole is bored through the tub-like machine that, as we have already said, is to form the basis of the unique structure, and a long nail, made for the purpose and furnished gratuitously by the village blacksmith, unites the 2. Curiously enough, no hammer is allowed to drive this nail, which is sent home by a smooth stone. The herring cask is next demolished, and the staves are soon undergoing a diminution at both extremities in order to fit them for their proper position. They are nailed at intervals of about 2 inches all round to the lower edge of the Clavey barrel, while the other ends are firmly fastened to the spoke, an aperture being left sufficiently large to admit the head of a man. Amid tremendous cheering, the finished Clavey is now set up against the wall, which is mounted by 2 stout young men, who proceed to the business of filling and lighting. A few pieces of the split-up tar barrel are placed in a pyramidal form in the inside of the Clavey, enclosing a small space for the reception of a burning peat. When everything is ready, the tar, which had been previously removed to another vessel, is now poured over the wood, and the same inflammable substance is freely used, while the barrel is being closely packed with timber and other combustible materials that rise 12 or 13 inches above the rim. By this time, the shades of evening have begun to descend, and soon the subdued murmur of the crowd breaks forth into one loud prolonged cheer, as the youth who was dispatched for the fiery peat, for custom says no sulphurous Lucifer, no patent Congreve dare approach within the sacred precincts of the Clavey, arrives with his glowing charge. The master builder, relieving him of his precious trust, places it within the opening already noticed, where, revived by a hot blast from his powerful lungs, it ignites the surrounding wood and tar, which quickly bursts into a flame. During the short time the fire is allowed to gather strength, cheers are given in rapid succession for the Queen, the Laird, the Provost, the town, the harbour, and the railway, and then Clavey bearer number 1, popping his head between the staves, is away with his flaming burden. Formerly, the Clavey was carried in triumph round every vessel in the harbour, and a handful of grain thrown into each in order to ensure success for the coming year. But as this part of the ceremony came to be tedious, it was dropped, and the procession confined to the boundaries of the town. As fast as his heavy load will permit him, the bearer hurries along the well-known route, followed by the shouting Burghedians, the boiling tar meanwhile trickling down in dark, sluggish streams all over his back. Nor is the danger of scalding the only one he who essays to carry the clavey has to confront, since the least stumble is sufficient to destroy his equilibrium. Indeed, this untoward event at one time looked on as a dire calamity, foretelling disaster to the place and certain death to the bearer in the course of next year, not unfrequently occurs. Having reached the junction of two streets, the carrier of the clavey is relieved, and while the change is being effected, firebrands plucked from the barrel are thrown among the crowd, who eagerly scramble for the tarry treasure, the possession of which was of old deemed a sure safeguard against all unlucky contingencies. Again the multitude bound along, again they halt for a moment as another individual takes his place as bearer, a post for the honour of which there is sometimes no little striving. The circuit of the town being at length completed, the clavey is borne along the principal street to a small hill near the northern extremity of the promontory called the Doory, on the summit of which a freestone pillar, very much resembling an ancient altar, has been built for its reception, the spoke fitting into a socket in the centre. Being now firmly seated on its throne, fresh fuel is heaped on the clavey, while, to make the fire burn brighter, a barrel with the ends knocked out is placed on the top. Cheer after cheer rises from the crowd below, as the efforts made to increase the blaze are crowned with success. Though formerly allowed to remain on the Doory the whole night, the clavey is now removed when it is burned about half an hour. Then comes the most exciting scene of all. The barrel is lifted from the socket and thrown down on the western slope of the hill, which appears to be all in one mass of flame, a state of matters that does not, however, prevent a rush to the spot in search of embers. Two stout men, instantly seizing the fallen clavey, attempt to demolish it by dashing it to the ground, which is no sooner accomplished than a final charge is made amongst the blazing fragments, that are snatched up in total, in spite of all the powers of combustion, in an incredibly short space of time. Up to the present moment, the origin of this peculiar custom is involved in the deepest obscurity. Some would have us to believe that we owe its introduction to the Romans, and that the name clavey is derived from their Latin word clavus, a nail, which is being frequently put to death in a barrel stuck full of iron spikes, or from clavis, a key, the rite being instituted when Agricola discovered that Toroton, i.e. Burghead, afforded the grand military key to the north of Scotland. As well might these wild speculators have remarked that Doory, which may be spelled Dury, sprang from Durus, cruel, on account of the bloody ceremony celebrated on its summit. Another opinion has been boldly advanced by one party to the effect that the clavey is Scandinavian in origin, being introduced by the Norwegian Vikings during the short time they held the promontory in the beginning of the 11th century, though the theorist advances nothing to prove his assumption, save a quotation from Scott's Marmion. While, to crown all, we have to listen to a story that bears on its face its own condemnation, invented to confirm the belief that a certain witch, yclept, or formerly known as, Kitty Clavers, bequeathed her name to the singular rite. Unfortunately, all external evidence being lost, we are compelled to rely entirely on the internal, which we have little hesitation, however, in saying points to an unmistakable manner down through the long vistas of our national history, to where the mists of obscurity hang around the Druid worship of our forefathers. It is well known that the elements of fire were often present in Druidical orgies and customs, as witness their Crantara, while it is universally admitted that the bonfires of May Day and Midsummer Eve, still kept up in different parts of the country, are vestiges of these rites, and why should not the clavey be so too, seeing that it bears throughout the stamp of a like parentage? The carrying home of the embers as a protection from the ills of life, as well as the other parts of the ceremony, finds a counterpart in the customs of the Druids, and though the time of observance be somewhat different, yet may not the same causes, now unknown ones, that have so greatly modified the clavey, have likewise operated in altering the date, which, after all, occurs at the most solemn part of the Druidical year. Ringing out the old year, the close of the year brings along with it a mingled feeling of gladness and melancholy, of gladness in the anticipation of brighter days to come with the advent of the new year, and of melancholy in reflections on the fleeting nature of time, and the gradual approach to the inevitable goal in the race for life. That so interesting an occasion should be distinguished by some observance or ceremony appears but natural. and we accordingly find various customs prevail, some sportive, others serious, and others in which both the mirthful and pensive moods are intermingled. One of the best known and most general of these customs is that of sitting up till 12 o'clock in the night of the 31st of December, and then, when the eventful hour has struck, proceeding to the house door and unbarring it with great formality to let out the old and let in the new year. The evening in question is a favourite occasion for social gatherings in Scotland. The assembled friends, this welcoming together the birth of another of father's time ever increasing, though short-lived progeny. In Philadelphia and North America we are informed that the old year is there fired out, and the new year fired in by a discharge of every description of firearm, musket, fowling piece, and pistol. In the island of Guernsey, it used to be the practice of children to dress up a figure in the shape of a man, and after parading it through the parish, to bury it on the seashore or in some retired spot. This ceremony was styled enterrer le vieux bout de l'âne. And that ends us for our festive episode here at Random Scottish History. And I wish you all the very best for your new year and whatever may come for you within it. And we will see you again next time. Take care.